All right, let's talk about something that I guarantee has happened to you if you've ever used an AI. It's weird, frustrating unpredictability. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and figure out why these incredibly powerful systems can feel so, well, random. Let's go find the ghost in the machine. You've been there, right? You type a prompt into a large language model, and you get a pretty great answer. So you run the exact same prompt again, maybe you need to reproduce it, and you get something totally different. Now, sure, some of that is on purpose. It's a feature called sampling. But what if I told you that this happens even when you try to force the AI to be 100% predictable? So you can actually set a model to what's called greedy sampling, or a temperature of 0. You're basically telling it, hey, no creativity, just pick the single most likely next word every single time. In theory, that should mean you get the exact same text bit for bit every time you run the same prompt. But in the real world, you don't. So what on earth is going on? Well, the go-to explanation, the one you'll hear most often, blames a combination of two things: the weird way computers handle decimal numbers, and the fact that the GPUs running these models are doing a million things at once. We can call this our prime suspect, the concurrency and floating point hypothesis. And this isn't just some fringe theory, it's a widely accepted idea in the research community. This quote from a recent paper basically says that the math itself can get a little fuzzy. Because GPUs do so much in parallel, the order that numbers get added up can change just a tiny bit from run to run, and that can lead to different results. Okay, this example shows you the problem perfectly. We're talking about floating point numbers. That's just how computers do decimals. And with them, the order of operations changes everything. Look at that first line. You add a tiny number to a gigantic one, and the tiny number basically gets rounded down to nothing. The result is 0. But in the second line, you subtract the big numbers from each other first, and poof, our little point 1 survives. Same numbers, same math, different order, completely different answer. And these little errors can stack up in a huge way. The source material for this actually showed that just adding up a simple list of 8 numbers in a random order can create over 100 unique answers. So you can see why this is the usual suspect, right? It seems totally plausible, but it's not the whole story. And this is where we get the plot twist. Because while that whole floating point thing is absolutely real, it doesn't actually explain the randomness we're seeing in these AI models. The real culprit is something deeper and, honestly, a lot more surprising. This is it. This is the clue that cracks the whole case wide open. If those random floating point errors were really the main problem, then a core calculation like matrix multiplication should also be random, right? But it's not. The researchers ran it 1,000 times, and they got the identical result every single time. So, something else has to be going on here. So what is that something else? Well, it turns out the real culprit is a property, or rather the lack of a property, called batch invariance. Let me put it simply. The answer you get for your prompt can literally change depending on how busy the server is, how many other people's prompts are being processed at the exact same time as yours. Your result is being influenced by the server load. The code here is the smoking gun. That first line shows a calculation for just one single request all by itself. The second line runs that exact same calculation, but as part of a big batch of requests, and then it just pulls out our one result. Now, mathematically, those two things should be absolutely identical, but they aren't. And we're not talking about some tiny rounding error in the 8th decimal place. Look at that number. The difference was over 1,600. That's definitive proof. The math underneath is fundamentally changing based on the batch size, which, from your perspective as a user, is completely random. That is the real ghost in the machine. So if we know what's causing it, can we actually fix it? And the answer is a resounding yes. See, this isn't some fundamental law of physics or hardware we're running up against. It's an engineering challenge, and it's one we can solve by just forcing the system to be consistent. So the path to making this thing truly deterministic involves a 3-step plan. You have to re-engineer 3 core parts of the AI's brain, so to speak. You've got to fix how it normalizes data, how it does that matrix multiplication we talked about, and, maybe most importantly, how its attention mechanism works. Each piece had to be reworked to do the exact same thing every time. The main idea behind all these fixes is pretty straightforward. You have to enforce absolute consistency. You force the software to take the exact same computational path every single time. No more taking clever shortcuts or optimizing differently just because the batch size changes. Every calculation has to follow the same rigid set of steps to guarantee the same outcome. Okay, but that sounds like a ton of work. Why does this even matter? Is getting a consistent answer really that big of a payoff? Oh yeah, it's a total game changer, not just for reliability, but for the entire future of AI research. Just look at this. This chart says it all. A standard, off-the-shelf system was given the same prompt 1,000 times, and it spit out 80 different answers. 80! But after they put in these batch invariant fixes, that same experiment produced just one answer. All 1,000 completions were bit for bit identical. That is the difference between chaos and control. And we're not talking about some invisible difference that only a computer scientist would notice. The researchers saw that for one prompt, 2 different runs were identical for over 100 words, and then they suddenly split. One response said the physicist Richard Feynman was born in Queens, New York, while another said New York City. It's a small change, but it came from pure computational randomness. Now, what's the catch? There's always a catch, right? In this case, it's performance. Forcing the system down this one rigid path means you can't always use the fastest, most optimized calculation. So yeah, it took about 60% longer. But the key thing here is that it's still very, very usable. It's a performance hit, not a disaster. But for AI researchers, this is the real jackpot. Imagine you're trying to teach an AI by having it practice, but the practice environment is always slightly different from the real-world test. That's the problem they face today. This fix gets rid of that gap. It lets you train the AI in the exact same environment it will be used in, which makes training much more stable and direct. It's like letting the AI study for the actual exam instead of a bunch of slightly different practice tests. This could be a huge leap. And really, this is the core message from the researchers at Thinking Machines Lab. It's so easy to look at these massive, complex systems and just throw your hands up and say their quirks are unavoidable. But like they say here, we should reject that defeatism. If you dig in, you can understand these problems and you can solve them. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? This whole randomness problem was seen by almost everyone as a fundamental, unavoidable part of the hardware. But it turned out to be a software problem that could be fixed. It just makes you wonder, what other ghosts are we just living with that are really just engineering challenges waiting for someone to come along and finally solve them?